the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, today is a momentous, historic, solemn day in the history of the United States Senate and in the history of our republic. The House of Representatives will send articles of impeachment against President Trump to the Senate, and the Speaker will appoint the House managers of the impeachment case. 2 articles will be delivered. The first charges the President with the abuse of power, coercing a foreign leader into interfering in our elections, using the powers of the presidency, the most powerful public office in the nation, to benefit himself. The second charges the President with obstruction of Congress for an unprecedented blockade of the legislature's authority to oversee and investigate the executive branch. Let's put it a different way. The House of Representatives has accused the President of trying to shake down a foreign leader for personal gain to help him in his campaign, and has done everything possible to cover it up. This administration is unprecedented in not being open, in its desire for secrecy, in its desire to prevent the public from knowing what it's doing. And it's worst of all when it comes in an impeachment trial. The 2 offenses are the types of offenses the founders had in mind when they designed the impeachment powers of Congress. Now, Americans, and the Founding Fathers in particular, from the very founding day of the Republic, have feared the ability of a foreign power to interfere in our elections. Americans never wanted a foreign power to have sway over our elections. But that is what President Trump is doing, of soliciting in these articles. I would ask my colleagues, I would ask the American people, do we want a foreign power determining who our president is, or do we want the American voter to determine it? It's that serious. It's that serious. That is the central question. Who should determine who's our president and our other elected officials? From the early days of the Republic, foreigners have tried to interfere. And from the early days of the Republic, we have resisted. But according to these articles, and in other things he has done, President Trump seems to aid and abet it. His view is if it's good for him, that's good enough. That is not America. We are a nation of laws, rule of law, not of the rule of one man. So the Senate's job is to now try the case, to conduct a fair trial, to determine if these very severe charges, very severe, letting, aiding, abetting, encouraging a foreign power to interfere in our elections and then threatening them with the cutoff of aid, our job is to try the case, because the President's offenses merit, if they are proven, the most severe punishment our Constitution imagines. The House has made a very strong case, but clearly senators have to see that case and watch it firsthand. And a fair trial means that the prosecutors making the case and the President's counsel providing the defense have all the evidence available. It means that senators have all the facts to make an informed decision. That means relevant witnesses. That means relevant documents. And we all know that. We all know, every member of this body, Democrat or Republican, that you can't have a fair, open trial, particularly on something as weighty as impeachment, when we don't have the evidence and the facts. And the precedents of the Senate are clear. Leader McConnell is constantly citing precedent. Well, here's one. The Senate has always heard from witnesses in impeachment trials. There have been 15 completed impeachment trials in the history of this country. In every single one of them, the Senate heard from witnesses. Let me repeat that for Leader McConnell's benefit, since he's always citing the precedent of 1999. There have been 15 completed impeachment trials, including the one in 1999, in the history of this country, in every single one of them, the Senate heard from witnesses. It would be unprecedented not to. President Johnson's impeachment trial had witnesses, 41 of them. President Clinton's trials had witnesses. Several of my colleagues, including the Republican leader, voted for them. Conducting an impeachment trial of a President of the United States with no witnesses would be without precedent and, frankly, a new low for the majority in this body that history will not look kindly on. Each day that goes by, the case for witnesses and documents gains force and gains momentum. Last night, a new cache of documents, including dozens of pages of notes, text messages, and other records, shed light on the activities of the President's associates in Ukraine. The documents paint a sordid picture of efforts by the President's personal attorney, Mr. Rudy Giuliani, and his associate, Lev Parnas, to remove a sitting U.S. ambassador and pressure Ukrainian President Zelensky to announce an investigation of one of the President's political rivals. Part of the plot to remove Ambassador Yovanovitch involved hiring a cheap Republican operative to follow her around and monitor her movements. How low can they go? Just when you think that President Trump and his network couldn't get possibly any more into the muck, reports suggest they're even dirtier than you could have imagined. I saw a novelist on TV this morning. He said, if I had brought this plot to my publisher, he would have rejected it. He said it's absurd. It could never happen. People won't believe it. Well, here it is, led by President Trump, who, again, cares not for the morals, ethics, and honor of this country as much as he cares about himself. To allegedly have some cut-rate political operative stalk an American ambassador at the direction of the President's lawyer, potentially with the President's, quote, knowledge and consent, that's what one of the emails said. I mean, how much more can America take in the decline of our morals, our values, our standing in the world? I don't care who you are, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. Doesn't this kind of thing bother you, if anyone did it, let alone the President of the United States? I don't know how any member of this body could pick up the newspaper this morning, read this new revelation, and not conclude that the Senate needs access to relevant documents like these in the trial of President Trump. The release of this new information dramatically underscores the need for witnesses and for documents. Now, the Republican leader has so far opposed Democratic requests to call 4 fact-finding witnesses and subpoena 3 specific sets of relevant documents, despite having no argument against them. The Republican position at the moment is to punt the question of witnesses and documents after each side finishes its presentation. Then, they say, they'll consider documents and witnesses with an open mind. Democrats have requested 4 fact witnesses. They are the President's top advisors, like Mr. Mulvaney. They are not Democrats. They are the President's men. They are not Democratic witnesses. They are not our witnesses. They are just witnesses, plain and simple. Each of them has firsthand information about the charges against the President. So, as the House prepares to send the articles to the Senate today, it's time for us, all of us, to turn to the serious job of conducting a fair trial, one that the American people will accept as fair, not as a cover-up, not as something that has hidden the evidence. And the focus of senators from both sides must fall on the question of witnesses and documents. Now on China. Later this morning, the President's expected to take part in a signing ceremony for the so-called Phase 1 trade agreement with China. Now, I have commended the President for its instincts when it comes to China. His instincts were, at one point, to be strong and tough. I've compared his stances favorably to previous administrations. I was rooting for the president to succeed for the sake of jobs and wealth and economy in this country, and I've told him that personally. So this Phase 1 deal is an extreme disappointment to me and to millions and millions of Americans who want to see us make China play fair. President Trump's Phase 1 trade deal with China is a historic blunder. Several harmful policies and practices are reportedly unaddressed. First, there appear to be no commitments to end China government subsidy program that continues to hurt U.S. industries and workers at all levels. Second, there appear to be no commitments to reform the Chinese policy of state-owned enterprises that unfairly compete with American enterprises and take American jobs away while they're allowed to freely sell here while our best companies can't sell there. Third, there appear to be no commitments to curtail the illegal dumping of Chinese products into our markets, which puts American firms out of business and workers out of a job. Fourth, glaringly, there appear to be no significant commitments to definitely end China's predatory and flagrant cyber theft of American intellectual property, which has stolen a generation of American jobs and American wealth. Fifth, concerning what the deal achieves in terms of agricultural purchases, it appears the Trump administration has not addressed the fact that China has existing contracts with countries like Brazil and Argentina. They don't need any more of our products, certainly not the amount that's been talked about. And the agreement does not grapple with the fact that American farmers have already lost billions, watched their markets disappear, and gone bankrupt in the time it took the president to reach the deal. Reading the reporting of Phase 1 of the trade deal feels like watching a bad rerun of the past 10 years of botched trade negotiations with China. I fear that President Xi is laughing at us behind our backs for having gained so much at our expense. The United States concedes our leverage, and in exchange, China makes vague, unenforceable promises it never intends to fulfill. We've seen this over and over again. China agrees to something, and they don't do it. President Trump complained about President Obama and President Bush and others when they signed these deals and nothing happened, and he's doing the same darn thing. Same darn thing, and it's no wonder they haven't made it public. They're afraid that when people actually read it, they'll see that it's not good for America, that the Chinese took us hook, line, and sinker. So, Mr. President, if I sound frustrated and angry, it's because I am. Even today, an hour before the deal is signed before the president, I have to use phrases like appear to and according to reports, because the administration has shrouded the details of the agreement in secrecy, kept the text of the deal under lock and key. The Trump administration doesn't want the details of the agreement to come out before they can spin it, because it knows that once the details come out, everyone will see that China has taken President Trump to the cleaners. President Trump, the great negotiator, has been totally out-negotiated by President Xi. Just like on impeachment, the president and his team are afraid of the truth. They don't want anyone to see the facts or the truth. They just want to spin. If the Trump administration were proud of this deal, they'd hold it up to the world and shout it from the mountaintops. Instead, they've kept it hidden. They want to spin it, but they can't spin away the fact that this deal is a bad deal for American workers, American companies, American jobs, and American wealth. Even today, the day the agreement is signed, we've been told we may not get all the details. Given the absurd secrecy surrounding President Trump's Phase 1 trade deal, I expect that once everyone gets to take a look at it in the light of day, they'll find that the administration has signed one of the most tragically one-sided agreements in recent memory. Even the farmers. President Trump sold out the structural changes to try and help the farmers. When they look at the specifics, they're going to see they're a lot less than meets the eye, and that our farmers will continue to suffer. There was an opportunity here to secure real reforms to China's rapacious trade and industrial policy. President Trump may have just squandered it indefinitely, a severe and potentially irreparable loss for the American people, American businesses, American workers. And given how poorly Trade One deal was executed with China, I have virtually no faith that Trade Deal 2, if it ever comes about, will be any better. In fact, most Americans should fear it if it's anything like this one. On the wall. Yesterday, the Washington Post reported that the Trump administration is planning to divert $7.2 billion in funding from the Defense Department to fund its border wall with Mexico. Once again, the administration proposes stealing this funding from military families and counter-drug programs, bringing the total amount that the President has stolen from our troops and our family to over $13 billion. The last time the President took money away from military construction, serious military projects suffered. Schools in Kentucky, medical facilities in North Carolina, hurricane recovery projects in Florida. Now, the President wants to take even more money away from these projects for a border wall that he promised Mexico would pay for. This is another slap in the face to our armed forces, their families, and all the places throughout America that have military bases that need new construction funding. Some Democrats, Senate Democrats, strongly oppose this action. We will continue to oppose the transfer of counter-drug funding for the wall. And we will force yet another vote to terminate the President's bogus national emergency declaration and return these much-needed military construction funds back to the military, to the men and women in our armed forces, and to their families. Our Republican friends hopefully will join us in that vote. President Trump is once again subverting the will of Congress, once again thumbing his nose at the Constitution. The founders gave Congress the power of the purse, not the President. And this chamber has refused repeatedly to fund the President's wall. But whether it's to federal appropriations, foreign policy, or our oversight authority, President Trump seems to have little regard for constraints placed on the executive. He seems to view the Constitution as merely a nuisance, some inconvenient obstacle in the way of his personal and political interests. It's time for Democrats and Republicans to say enough. And I'd say one final thing to my conservative friends. The true foundation of conservatism is to minimize the powers of government, particularly the executive, because they believe it provides more room for the individual. Where are our conservative voices when Donald Trump, in issue after issue, one of the most egregious being this border wall, takes the power away from Congress, away from the American people, and arrogates it unto his own personal wishes? I yield the floor.